The function buttons on the front of the Viking Designer Epic sewing machine are there for a reason. These are the buttons that you're probably going to use the most. So I just want to show you just a couple tricks because some of them are used in more than one way. So for example, let's just go ahead and start sewing. Probably the one I use the most is the needle down button. So when the needle's down, you'll see that the presser foot hops back up and allows me to quickly turn the fabric and actually easily do applique or go around corners or just kind of let the fabric relax. Now here is something that you can do when you don't want to keep your foot on the foot control all the time, is use the StartStop button. Now usually I use this when I sew out decorative stitches, but I'm going to first reduce the speed down. And on the screen, I know you can't see it, but it's actually showing you a little symbol showing how much we've reduced. So then when we touch the StartStop button, it doesn't feel like it's racing away. And you just use your button to start it and stop it. That's the same button that we use in embroidery to run the embroidery machine. So if you ever forget your foot control when you're heading out to class, no fear, you can technically still sew with the StartStop button. You can increase the speed up to normal settings. Now let's talk about this scissor button. So if I just push it right now, the needle is going to go down and the thread is going to get cut. So when I pull it out, I'm ready to stitch again. And you'll notice there's only one thread. That bobbin thread is cut and it's just waiting for it to come up on the next stitch. But watch what happens when we start to sew, and while we're sewing, we touch the scissor button. What it does is it finishes the stitch, does a locking stitch, cuts it, and then lifts the foot. So it does it all at once. So do you see the little light blinking when the scissor button was pushed? That means that the system is still going. So sometimes, watch this, if you use the StartStop button and use your scissor button, it will do the whole thing from start to finish without you having to do much work. I do like with the decorative stitches that finishes the pattern, it locks it, then cuts it, and then lets me pull the fabric out. Now, speaking of decorative stitches, if you're ever sewing a decorative stitch and you get about halfway through and then you realize you need to either start over or you're done and you're just going to start again over at another point, this is like a stitch restart button. So that means that it will start the stitch again at the beginning of the pattern. We use this a lot with our Stitching Cosmos students where they're doing decorative stitches, but then we need to be back at the beginning. They've stopped in the middle. So that is really, really handy. Same thing with decorative stitches. I'm going to just pick something simple here. When I'm stitching along and I want the pattern to end at the end without it cutting, that's what the stop button is for. So the stop will then also lock, but it doesn't cut. So it might let me say, go ahead and return. And notice the light goes off once I start again. So it's kind of like a one-time use. Now, when you see the stop on with embroidery, that means that it's going to stop between color changes. Now, I have had people when they're embroidering go, why didn't it stop? And that's because they've accidentally pushed the stop button to stop the machine, realize that didn't work, and then use the actual StartStop button to stop it. But then they go again, and now all colors, say 6, 7, and 8, all run together because you told the machine to not stop. So that's one of those buttons that you have multiple uses. The other thing that's really handy with the needle up, needle down button in embroidery is that moves it to the trim position. You're going to see me using that quite a bit in our Embroidery Essentials online course and also when we get into the embroidery side. So what it does is it moves the hoop to you so you can trim, often without having to remove the hoop from the embroidery arm. And then when you start again, that needle, or I should say the hoop, moves back into position and it starts sewing. So it's really nice. That one I'm always using. You'll also notice you have your reverse buttons, and there's actually 2 of them, one on each side. So very handy if you're right-handed, left-handed. That really helps make it nice and smooth. So same thing, if you do push it and the light is on, that means that it's permanent. That means it's going backwards until you unlight it. So depending on how you like to use your reverse button, so if you're just sewing a straight stitch, you just need it to tack back while you hold it, just touch it while you're sewing and then release it. Notice the light didn't stay on because I touched it while I was sewing. So keep that in mind. Now the other thing that I do want to show you is your foot up and down features here, because when okay, so right now the foot is just at a normal height, no problem. But if you want the foot to go up a little higher, listen. The foot went higher, but there was like a little extra click. The feed dogs actually also went down. So there's a lot of room underneath the foot. So if you have something really thick, utilize that up feature and get those feed dogs to go down. They'll pop up when you go to sew, and that'll be perfect. The other thing that you can do is, let me go ahead and do this, cut the thread. So when I sometimes start to sew and the foot is in the up position, I can't tell where it's going to come down to. You think you can, but once that foot gets closer to the fabric, you realize, oh, I'm not where my fabric needs to be. Touch that down foot option again, and the foot just popped up just like that 1/8 of an inch, so I can slide it closer to where I want it to start. I can see, yep, that's where I want it to be, and then once you step on the foot control, that will come down. So you notice you don't always have to lift or lower the presser foot to make it start, but if you feel like that is helpful for you, you sure can. But just go ahead and know that all these buttons have kind of multiple uses, and I hope you'll get used to trying them out. Oh, the one last thing, the fix button. The fix button is probably the one that people always ask me the most. What is fix? And fix means it's a locking stitch. So the light being on right now means I've used the thread cutter at the last seam. So fix means it's going to start with some locking stitches, and what that's doing is helping making sure that the bobbin thread comes up and gets connected with the top thread. So if I go ahead and touch that, you notice the light goes off, but if I touch fix, it's an on-demand locking stitch, but then nothing happens. There's no cut. The foot has lifted because my needle is in the needle down position, but it just is that on-demand. I want it to just lock immediately and then stop. So depending on how you want that to be used, remember if you touch your scissor button while you're sewing, which is what I like, that there's like a fix button, fix feature built into that function all at once. So again, try out these different functions, and at the end of this video, check out some of our other videos on the Viking Epic sewing machine.